Hello, fellow Canberrans and poets and listeners and readers. Thank you for turning out tonight to what is effectively, I'm completely blind, there's interrogation level lighting here. So I just have to stare at the room and assume there's people breathing out there, so I hope you are. Thank you for coming out to the last night of what is formerly the POTM Alumni Festival. And yay to everybody, especially Kimberly, for making it all happen. We are, of course, on Ngunnawal country, and I want to pay my respects to the community, especially to the elders, past and present, and to express my gratitude that I have so often been made welcome to walk on this country. So respects all round. The structure tonight is we're going to have a smallish open mic under strict instructions from Kimberly. So if you go longer than you should be, I'll simply push you off the stage, and Shane will catch you and carry you outside. So I think there's six readers. Then we'll have a break, and everyone should buy wine and coffee to keep Smith's liquid and yourselves hydrated. Or dehydrated, you know what wine and coffee does. And after that, then unfortunately I had to struggle through Hetherington and myself, reading briefly, small reading, and then the three directors of the festival over these last 8 years, starting with Professor Munden, going on to Professor Strange, and finishing with Professor Williams. Yay. So that's, and then we'll be done, and then we'll leave, so Smith can go home and go to bed.
Hooray!
Hooray! So we can go home and go to bed. Our first reader, before I go on to that, I should say, those of you who are still here from far-flung places, whether they be within this huge island continent or from much further away overseas, thank you for coming. Thank you for staying, and go well when you do go. Anne M. Carson is our first reader. It's the usual condom on, condom off thing.
There you go. Thanks very much for having me here. As Jen said, it's very hard to see anyone, but my poem is from my last book, which is The Amazing True Story of the Masseur of Heinrich Himmler. And he used his influence over Himmler, amazingly, to secure the release of many tens of thousands of people. So he's a pretty interesting dude. And he had lunch with Mussolini, and I've imagined how this went, but it was just the two of them. But the fact is that he did have lunch with Mussolini, and that's what the poem's called, Lunch with Mussolini. A Rhapsody in 4 Courses, Rome, sometime after 1930. I should have tales about the politics we speak, recount how the great man sees fascism's future in the world. But instead I recall how, at first touch of silverware, the spatchcock melts from the bone. How sublime the pasta, tagliatelle con sugo di puccini e crema. I have to taste that fabulous infusion again. Merest touch of tarragon. Benito is launched on a favourite theme, how hard the Germans are, their total lack of gaiety or humour, essentially barbarian still. Between mouthfuls I nod accord. I hope he doesn't think me rude for interrupting, asking if the palazzo chef might furnish me the recipe. I'm desperate to add it to my files. Then Folletto, processionally from the kitchen, maitre d' at the head, closhed silver salver aloft. Next, junior waiters in train, with vegetables, austerity be damned, 6 separate covered platters. At the rear, the largest silver gravy boat I've seen. Its performance, as only Italians can. Theatre for an audience of 2. Il Duce and me. The beef in all its glory is revealed, monarch of the meal. A flourish, a neat bow by the maitre d'. He carves succulent slices for our plates. The fineness of the meat almost finishes me. I could drown in the delicious delicacy of the jus, butter, wine, caramelised filetto juice with just perhaps a hint of stock. Semi-freddo for dessert, creamy confection to roll around the tongue, relish the welcome bite of raspberry, to cut the cream. Thank you.
I'm a vegetarian and not all that interested in food. That still sounds really nice to me. Haven't had much practice. One of the things I really like about open mic is that we don't have to do bio notes, but I do welcome Oliver, who comes from a long way away and who has a very fine line in poems. Oliver Cummins.
It's quite tender. So this Paul was written for poem. This poem was written for Paul Munden.
Do we need to do that erotic thing, Shane?
What's that?
Squeeze the
Squeeze.
shaft.
Yeah, just squeeze the shaft. And lift.
Or push the button.
Push the button, that's better.
It's a regular bad joke, sorry, Oliver.
Hello. I wanted to send a message. Something terse and heartening. Text would have been a perfect vehicle. But then I remembered where you live. How the signal's consistently weak, barely present. There's no point in transmitting a moment's insight when I know it won't arrive until you're leaving, setting off from home on a purposeful errand, or travelling further on a more significant mission. Having abandoned the idea of creating an effect that would be instantaneous if it wasn't dependent on some dodgy cell phone connection, I've chosen a riskier mode, attempting to use a fountain pen. This missive was written slowly, to be sent by post, knowing you will make time for a bunch of words on paper, even though it is unlikely either of us will comprehend the original urgency or meaning.
It was very, like as Cassandra said. Zenobia Frost. I know you have some. Squeeze.
Hello. Lovely to be back in Canberra.
Yeah,
thank you. Nice festival you've got here.
We've been practicing.
8 years, is it? Good age. Right. I think I've mentioned terrible puns to a couple of people I've been chatting to. So this is some poems about moths, and they're kind of operatic in scale. Moths being Lepidoptera. So this is the Lepidopera. That's all, thank you. One. Ogmograptus scribbler, scribbly gumboff. Infamous for juvenilia, this bug mines bark for art, hitting her peak with work pinned to the bush equivalent of a fridge door. Her larval jaws etch out whole galleries, then give up the ghost gum. We always thought she'd go so far, now she's a shut-in in the suburbs. Bet she'll get herself knocked up too, and the pattern will repeat. New scribbles, but no new language. I guess that's small towns for you. 2. Psychedy, case moth. And there's only 3, don't worry. A family of women kept locked in towers. Case moths, whose vestigial virgins live out their lives, without true wings, legs, even mouths, in Stygian sacks, just waiting to be opened like a Ziploc bag. Let's rub salt in the wound of half-formed things and call them bagworms. She's not even waiting for his second coming, just the fucking first. Like the time I got dumped on vacation, left a limbless cunt in waiting, stitching a quilt from scraps of love. But the name sounds so lovely, like Psyche, wife of Eros, as if her story ended at the part where she opens Proserpina's box and spins herself an infernal sleeping bag. 3. Piers Rupee, cabbage moth. Technically not a moth. She's the purplest people eater who picks the mate with brightest ultraviolet pigment. She blushes mauve, he flexes shades of plum to say he can vajazzle up her bursa copulatrix with bespoke spermatophore. A Trojan tic-tac, which her legit dentata chew to reach the picnic box of proteins at its core. At least he buys her dinner. We've all had a beau convinced that we could thrive on kale and cum. But kinkier, the cabbage moth keeps every crust inside her, teeth and acid and the husks of what men just as bright before you left behind. Thank you.
What was that, something?
I said I have to remember the kale and cum.
We all remember the kale and
Not a good diet.
No, too much salt. Thank you, that was pretty amazing. Ross Donnan said to me that he finds when he comes to Canberra that he's interested that we don't clap. You know, if there's a seat, obviously we clap after each one, there's a single person. But if you're reading several poems, we don't clap in between, and he said most people do. So I asked him to listen for the ooh and ah. Goes all the way through a good reading. There's a lot of real enthusiasm back there. Sue Donnelly, where are you? Woo.
Jeez, how do you follow that? I'll give it my best shot. Okay. Drowning the shopping trolley took one more breath. Drowning the shopping trolley took one more breath. Thank you.
Short, sweet, weird, sad. Thank you, Sue.
It's true. It's all true.
Poor shopping trolley. I actually saw a shopping trolley fished out of the floods just a few days ago. It was all bedecked with dead leaves and grass. It looked very attractive, but it clearly was dead. Our penultimate reader for this open mic is Steffi Litton.
called Sting. Oh, I might put this on post as well. I thought I might want her as we sat waiting on warm concrete, patiently for the blackberry sky, glittering floral arrangements marking another man-made milestone. Maybe it was the different light, the glow of the museum at night, or the way she told me of her many roles, daughter, sister, therapist, her body a home for her family's pain. Or had this shift been coming for weeks, over hours together, taking her cat to the vet, returning the wheelchair she no longer needs, wondering whether pine trees are magic or just very good at providing shade. Whatever it was, it caught me by surprise. Thoughts of her took over my mind, multiplied, as if I'd followed a single bee back to her hive, and then there were thousands buzzing in my brain, repeating her name. Until they stopped. And I thought I might not want her. As we rearranged her room, faces flushed, waiting for the evening cool to descend like a loved one's late flight. And maybe it was the different light cast by the poem she shared about loving and needing and hating and going and staying and making things hard. Things are already hard enough. I felt my heart harden at the thought of importing more pain, inviting it in, asking the bees not only to stay, but to sting.
Love the thought of singing bees. It's a nicer way to think about their voice than just hum or buzz, I think. We have one last reader, and everyone's gone through so rapidly, reading such short poems, basically, that we actually have a little bit of time in hand. So Andrew Moss is our final reader, and feel free to amble up and to read slowly.
It's a long walk from Goulburn. Thank you. This poem actually is a bit of a correction to something I said in an interview when I quite proudly said my mum was training to be a nun and my dad was training to be a priest, and then they met. Actually, it turns out my mum was teacher training at a college run by nuns, so that's inspired this poem. And apparently on their first date, my mum brought along a hard-boiled egg because she thought that she's Ghanaian, and she thought that's what Englishmen ate, and then apparently they do. Excellent. As the myth goes, the egg was cracked on my dad's VW Beetle gear stick. So that gives you a little bit of context to an otherwise pretty abstruse collection of words. So this is called Mum Met Dad. Mum met Dad and a speckled egg was cracked. Linear gear stick life went from reverse. The rod conducts neutral bursts from fourth to first. Hard-boiled tectonic plates shift, then smash. New world disorder plans naively hatch. Elliptical orbits collide and cultures crash. In a V-dubbed Beetle, double the clutch. Together future parents eat their lunch. Their white-brown hands hold tightly to defeat. Love-lined palm branches join destiny to meet. On traffic-jammed sandwiches they feast. Heads and wheels spin their mampong time machine. Mum's mahogany face surrounded by nuns, transfixed by a vision in flame-tongued sun. By the order of the holy paraclete, Ag Lion be the right revs Ashanti. From Whitby drift across the seas, caped crusaders unveil west coast to Horn. Girl child cries in maternity ward dawn. In the hall, Mum listens to the ages, to Saint Monica, motherhood of saints. From the same sky, each for all for God. Odo Mankoma, Onyame, Onyakapon. in threefold Father, Son and Holy Ghost. At Westcott House practice liberal Catholics. Catechisms strain cadence like collared dogs. Tightened semi-breves rest at octave notes. Dad, a Christian atheist scholar, hopes. He genuflects south in apostolic wobble, eardrums balancing Akan Gospels. Reach Asaseyar's bosom tree fountain, elixir spills out of the ocean river's mouth. Lagos lagoons synchronise tidal moons. Rainbow women flow into watery grooves. River Orisha wives of Shango's thunder strike. Subduction sucks, tsunamis rumble tide. A confluence of consciousness streams. Merge two flowing bodies in wonder's breeze. Two plate boundaries converge asunder torn. The crunch and fold in collision born. Cruciform, lift up wafer sun from mountain ridge, the gods of Oshon Oshogbo worshipping. Puzzle pieces together, tectonics tie. The first egg breathes a tibia ether sky. The second child chokes red rust in Corcor, transplanted next to Leighton's sandy soil. Tear ducts open, OPEC oil well up. Price rises trickle, poison from above. Seed sown in the barrenness of Thatcher land, in Britain xenophobia ties hands, but carapace shapeshift like a Nancy, thick skins harden twice in resilience, chameleon scales way, injustice's love, different pigments layer in brilliance, under a crisscross lattice, join hands in trust.
Thank you so much. Just 6 open mic readers, and they're all smashing, especially egg cracking smashing. Struggling. I'm struggling. I have to fill up 10 minutes, and I'm not going to. I do think we should give all 6 of our readers another hand. And Kimberly, did you want to say something more? Technically, we're going to take a break. Not even technically, you can do it mechanically, you can do it analogically. Take a 10-minute break. Yes? Have some conversation, have some wine and coffee and tea and sandwiches, and then return, please. Thank you.
So yeah, a little bit of extra break there. But really, and this is going to be a little bit indulgent, and I hope that you'll allow me this. But coming through the festival is, I think, because last year's festival, I was the director, but everything, we went into second lockdown and everything got put online, and so we really scaled back. And, you know, and I only arrived here in 2019. So what I realized, the thing that I am just completely blown away by is this community. And what poetry means to this community and how they come out for it and how they support it. And it's just, you know, I come from a completely other country that is pretty well known for its poetry, if you like poetry, right? And never found this anywhere I lived there. So first I'd just like to express my gratitude. I can't believe I get to be a part of this.
Aussie, Aussie, Aussie.
To add to my thanks, I have some people to thank, and you know, this is always the part when I'm in the audience, I tune out a little. But now that I've gone through this, these are heartfelt thanks, and that's a cliche, but there's no other way to express it. So first of all, our international guests who've come from so far, and especially those of you who are still here, thank you so much. Safe travel. And then our Australian guests. I know there's at least one Kiwi in the house. And also including local poets. I mean, you all, this is an amazing community. So applause for yourselves, please. I
I'd like to acknowledge everyone involved in the translation sessions and readings, and I was at the translation workshop today, and I learned so much in such a short amount of time. It was wonderful. So thanks to all of you. I see some of you out there, despite the lighting. Applause, please. I'd next like to thank everybody who supported the festival at the University of Canberra, because this is a University of Canberra Faculty of Arts and Design endeavor, and the funding comes from the Center for Creative and Cultural Research at UC, and so very much like to thank them. Yay! But I'd also like to thank, continuing to thank people affiliated with the university, the UC interns and student volunteers. Let me tell you, this would not have happened without them. Paul advised me not to name names lest I inadvertently leave anyone out. And no, and it's a good call because of my brain. But what I thought I would do instead is actually enumerate all the tasks that, for example, social media and the website, also both, would not have happened. They can do things I can't do, along with the setup and the takedown at the Gorman House. Emails and correspondence, keeping spreadsheets, helping with recordings, helping with video recordings, helping with all the technology needs. They wrote some interviews, they assisted with the workshops generally, and my gosh, most important of all, they kept me sane. And we aren't even done yet. I'd like to thank Smith's Alternative. Just what a great poetry venue this is. Members of the Poetry on the Move committee, because there is in fact a committee, and I am going to dare to name names. This is not completely extensive, exhaustive, but I'm just going to point out Paul, Jen, and Cassandra A. All a very important part in assisting with just advising, decision-making, suggestions, and all times of the year, not just now. Always available, always. I'd like to thank those who sold books. Yes. Woo. I'd like to thank everybody who's here tonight in the house, and anyone who came to any other event this main festival weekend as well. We have more fringe events happening, but to come out and just at a time when there's still a bit of uncertainty socially, and to have just a presence, a physical presence of support, it's just huge. So thank you all for being here, and being at the other events as well. I'd like to thank the ACT poetry community at large, and I would especially like to thank the past Poetry on the Move directors, Paul and Jane. I wouldn't be here without them. It's true. So, having said all of that, I just would like to say that tonight came about in the form that it came about to really celebrate 8 years of Poetry on the Move, to really celebrate this annual celebration of poetry, and to think about and listen to the poems of the people who founded the festival and then first took over its reign. So that's kind of the idea behind it. It's really meant to be a celebration. So yeah, that's what we're here for. So my next job then is to introduce the first two readers of the evening, and but before I do that, I realized that the American in me forgot to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the original custodians of the land. No, seriously, it means so much to me to be from a place where I think most people would be hard pressed to say what land they're on unless they live west of the Mississippi. And so I think it means a lot to me to just be able to pay my respects, and I'm doing that now. Yeah. Okay, and then and then a little bit more indulging, if you all don't mind. I'm going to actually give a little bit of personal bio to the two poets I'm introducing tonight, because probably you've heard the official bios, and they do go on, because they're incredible. Because of both of these poets, my entire life changed in ways that I can't even begin to explain, except for that one day, you know, you hear about those vision boards that people make, and I made one. And one of the things it said was a life in poetry. That's what I wanted. And by gum, I crossed the world, I crossed hemispheres, I crossed the equator, and I got a life in poetry. And it started with, how long was our first conversation? 3 minutes? 4 minutes? And I met Paul Hetherington at AWP conference in Florida, right? And he handed me a book, and he said, you know, are you a poet? I said, yes. He said, what kind of poetry do you write? And I said, at the time, mostly lyric and a little bit narrative. And he said, well, try this one. Never said it was his book, ever. I went home that night, and in a completely unusual move, because my son was with me. He still travels with me, in fact. I read it that evening, and I was hooked, and I thought, who's this poet? So I Googled him, because that's what you do, right? And I realized it was the man who handed me the book. And I thought, my gosh. And he's just this absolute, he's a fabulous poet. And you know this because his latest publication with Cassandra Atherton is University of Princeton. It's a beautiful book, and I'm so honored to have him as my mentor. So without further ado, Paul Hetherington.
Thanks, Kimberly. That's very touching. So I'm going to read from a book that was launched a week ago, and I'm not going to read the same poems. So those of you who were here a week ago, thanks for coming back. This is a book of poetic sequences, prose poetic sequences, and it's an attempt to explore kind of tensions between prose poetry and sort of lyric gestures, and look at sort of liminal moments, intersubjectivity, spacing, spaces, all of those sorts of issues. So I'm going to read from, I'd just like to thank Shane again for publishing it so wonderfully. I'm going to read a sequence called This Delicious Failure of Common Names. Summer. Time skirts a property's perimeters, where you consider years of herding and fencing, and a swing rocks over the creek as fractures of shade and sunlight churn underneath silky oaks, as a boy bends a sapling to the earth and tries to bury its end, piling rocks to secure it. He steps back and it shudders upright. You step forward into the space he's made, where light breaks through shattered foliage. He absconds, red-faced at your words. You move half into shade, possessing yourself against his intrusion. The thrill of light breaks over your arm. You see streaks of sweat, holding teetering summer in your palm. Triangles. Triangles chime in the hands of boys and girls. Tall windows scatter dusty light. At lunchtime, the headmaster is beaten at table tennis by one of the boys. A line of sentences is chalked on the board, a lesson on verbs and adverbs. Jane runs swiftly, and Dan dawdles painfully in a yard. The teacher raps her pointer. Pay attention, the orchestra will concentrate. But heat swarms. Look at the oval. A shrilling student indicates the window's view of stilt-legged walkers. You must sit still, the teacher shouts, to the strewn, emptying room. As you like it. Mostly it's a problem of memory. There's a man twirling his cane in a familiar film, but you're convinced you've never seen the character before, and the words spoken by the heroine sound like paraphrases from As You Like It. Jaques rails, you know the forest must be Arden, even as the countryside's referred to by another name, and the words a fool, bounce in your mind. Though the make of car reminds you of Salinas Valley and a recalcitrant James Dean, you find yourself searching for Rosalind. Wing, how that feeling, like a wing, held to your body, shifting in thought until the swan was most of what you were. Your sense of propriety lifting into lighter edicts, so that air whispered of snow, so that arms murmured of the intimate dance. Your name rested lightly in your mouth. You spoke less often, reading of mythologies that animated the ancient world. Stepping lightly, you thought of childhood privations, heard a crowd breathe appreciation, thinking of transformation. At last, without identity, you were no one you knew, all wing and a wild idea of flight. Butter. You don't know the word for butter, so you spend seconds miming the way it froths in the pan. The owner of the shop says nothing. You want to buy their famous pesto, but it's nowhere on display. You think of making red sauce and pasta, but tomato is another forgotten word. You speak to other customers who nod and frown. This village's traditions are deeply ingrained. Even the postmaster won't leave his mother tongue. Eventually you point at fragrant cheese and a melon that smells of ripest green. How delicious it is, this failure of common names. Tree mountain, vestiges, lumps of rock and dirt, the origin of a name. We have shaped the earth, filled the bay, taming a 3 camels hump of land, Shawmut, renamed Boston, Blackstone's invitation to fresh water amounting to more than he knew. We remembered Botolph, saint of farmers, travellers, a good worshipping Saxon, our origins pushed back into his pious body. We remembered that piety when we hung Robinson and Stevenson and obdurate Mary Dwyer, remembered too our dark journey here to the bobcats, black bears, moose and coyote, the circles of bats. I chased a chipmunk that was digging my garden, caught it, was going to pot it, but let it go here where the 3 peaks were, where the land has been ground, finding an iota of pity. Tears. You arrive at the party and a man in a yellow coat thrusts a bag of bananas. Some are green, others are so ripe they appear to melt into the brown paper. You put a green one in your pocket for later and take a glass of champagne from a waiter. A clown is falling over time and again as if it's an important joke. 3 women are juggling fire. On the balcony there are mice on a barbecue. A couple ask about love, flinging themselves against one another. It recurs. You look at the distant glacier that a decade ago filled the land. Melted ice runs into the blue sea as if from a peering eye. Gargantuan tears. Lozenges. You write from the Protestant cemetery in Rome. I love Keats' headstone. It's taken me back to the poems. I conjure the night funeral of Jonas Arcastrom and William Story's Angel of Grief. When we walked there, cats arched their backs, and we remembered our original avowals, oleanders and pines, cool shade like dousings of water, right words that occupied our mouths. We held loss like bodies in our arms, drank in warm air like breath from the graves. You said love was a forestalling, over and over through dark and coughing years. And words too, lozenges in the mouth. Fold. The clock folds time into its face. We're looking at a magpie on a wire, raising its wings as if to shape air. A movement of clouds scuffles until they stand apart, creating space and a bruised aftermath. We touch each other as lightly as the breeze skimming the long grass, as caressingly as a stretched, involved word. Gazing at an empty wire, seeing the outline of the vanished bird, we turn from the window and find ourselves stepping through another life, hearing the reverberant cry. Music. Music is an old Eagles song, and your hands are on my body. Was that 30 years ago, hearing my heartbeat like a stuttering engine? Two blackbirds peck at soil in the yard. Glossy thoughts line the mind. Your hands are wings as you turn. Your words lift and descend. You sing. The poem you wrote holds for decades, conjuring the sea's sour brilliance. You pointed at pines the size of black thumbprints, gestured at the oblivious expanse. You made up nonsense about being Ophelia. An envious sliver, you said, emphasizing the narrowness of the final word. And I'm just going to finish just reading a short three-part sequence or poem. 1. You find yourself talking to the wind as if it carries grave propositions. Thoughts attached to your body like wings. You feel a shudder and lift. Soon you're mouthing gnomic phrases, each one as evanescent as a trail of breath on glass. And afterwards you can't remember the words, as if persuasive images reduced to oily glints. A sense of the disconsolate ushers in the dead, reminding you they never finished talking. Words dissolve in air like fragments of catechism. 2. A woman stands on another's shoulders as if supported by outspread wings. A man carries a wrapped baby and gathers coins in a cup. The city's cathedral breaks in multifaceted window light. Recollection shows a girl reading under a peppermint tree and a drama class's rowdiness in a weatherboard church, a man on a bicycle spilling small change from his pocket. As a girl reaches to gather the silver tricklings, a boy challenges her with scrabbling fingers. In a small room, disentanglings, a dropped blouse, an unshuttered window, the stretched sound of a bell encircling belief. 3. The window looks onto an angel standing in the square. Her skin is marble white. Her gestures are flurries like the wing beats of small birds. The sky's an overflow of starlight. Words populate the apartment block like a swarm. A man reads to a woman from a blank book. They are veiled in each other's gaze. The angel's mouth babbles with human speech.
The angel's mouth babbles with human speech. If someone said to me, we're going to find you the best possible complimentary mentor. I would not have believed them. But when I arrived in Canberra, along with Paul, Jen Webb, who is Dean of Research, Graduate Research, thank you, and also Distinguished Professor at UC. But in addition, she's just this incredible poet. And if you, my favorite thing to do with Jen is to sit and listen, because she's so quick, and she can tell you so much in such a short space of time if you just listen. And so that's what I try to do. And so I invite her up here now, and we will listen. Yay!
When I was at primary school, everything we did was graded. And the only thing I failed semester after semester was handwriting, because they kept saying, you're writing too quickly. And then when I did high school, I did speech and drama and so on, and they'd say, you speak too quickly. So just because I'm quick doesn't mean it's any good, quite frankly. So I've been going through this sort of imposter syndrome, as one does, and so I decided I hate everything I've ever done in the past. And I am quite discourteously now going to read you poems that haven't been gone through an editor. So it's what my mate Billy Collins calls poems with the ink still wet on them. And the first one is called Past Imperfect. I was married for 17 years, many years ago, when I was young and foolish. And in those 17 years, I lived in 5 countries and about 40 homes, which meant I travelled light. You know, we had nothing at all, really. We just kept dumping everything and starting again somewhere else, as one does when one is, well, in an abusive relationship, really. But I thought I'm interested in the things that are dumped, and the things that you miss and the things you don't miss. So I wrote this poem about that. Everything we want is in the pawnbroker's window, and we stand on crumbled concrete, faces to the glass like children outside candy stores. There's your old typewriter, the one you used to write love letters, and then later your suicide note, and later still the I made it through though story that had your mum and me weeping in relief. Look, there's the baby cradle you built out of Lego blocks, where I laid our child each night swaddled. There's a silver cup I won for dressage, the medals from your athletics career. There's your dad's ribbons from the war, that he wore only once when someone pinned them to his chest and he stood to attention, eyes fixed in his famous 1,000-yard stare. If I had the cash, I'd redeem the love seat we pawned to pay bills I can't recall. Redeem family portraits painted by the famous artist who died full of years, full of cocaine. The teddy bear I loved, the first camera you owned, the cassette tapes with our children's first words. Let it go, you say, and I do. I think I do. I've been thinking a lot about the natural world, the material world, and I think probably most of us have, because we've been excluded from human company for so much of the last 2.5 years, that suddenly trees become our best friend, you know, and birds that come to the door every day and bang for nuts. You start giving them names and pretending that they're members of your family. So I've written a few poems about the natural world, which I don't believe is eco-poetics. I think it's just, you know, trying to get by, really. Yeah. We wake every day before dawn, first you, then me. The cats are lying in ambush, and the dogs with their therapist eyes are waiting at the back door. We wake early, and all I really want is sleep, but we head for the banks of the wide, still river, needing to see thin sun playing ducks and drakes across unbroken skin. Caring too much, healing too slowly, but that's a something we don't discuss. Listen to the beat between the phrases birds are calling. If you'd make the first move, if I could open my hands. A couple of others in the same kind of planty vein, planty animally vein. Morning behaves as though today is like any other day, as though the trees will still respire, and birds sing like flutes, and artichokes and aubergines cast their flowers and begin the earnest work of setting fruit. Sun shines blithely on us all, on the soldier dropped to one knee who is firing into the crowd, on the young man running across the square, cradling a wounded child in his arms, on the woman cradling a wounded youth in her arms. Turn off the television. Outside, 3 horses stand watching for you, ears pricked, and then they turn together and run, all joy, and sun peers between the trees, burnished. He's pacing the little kitchen, and that luscious sensuality is gone. Though he can still stir the old flesh, it really doesn't take him to the place where he wants to be, where there is care, where he might feel disappointment or loss or anything other than this gentle contentment. But it's so hard to rouse the senses when the senses have grown sleepy and the air is thick with rain and the rays of today's last sun, and there's coffee in the cafeteria, and he can hear, out of folds of memory, a cat calling to be let in, and her turning off the shower, stepping naked and wet and ready to turn to him, lighting the candle of her smile. I should have numbered these. I could say 1, 2, 3. As the rain fell, you remembered other rain, the elephant foot drops that forced you to steer blindly onto the shoulder, and Paul's wipers on triple speed until it eased, or the dismal drizzle that went on until you banged your head against the door, or the rain that meant drought was ending, fires running out of their steam. As the rain fell, you lay face up, feeling its fingers on your skin, ants creeping up your limbs to lap the rivulets and carry water back to their tiny dams, bees sheltering under the sage bush, waiting for the sun to return to pack away enough pollen to get them through another month, another week, another day. I love rain. It's different in every country in the world. Like, in New Zealand, it's actually quite dry rain. It rains a lot, but you don't really get all that wet. And in Queensland, you just get wet all the time. And in Africa, they're called elephant raindrops because they're so big. You get one drop basically covers your windshield. So there must be elephants in the sky. Because Paul Munden's here, I thought I'd do a couple of poems that at least allude to music. And this one is called Harmonious Mundi, which of course is after Johannes Kepler. The idea that the universe has its own song, that in fact there's harmonics that run between the planets, and if you could hear them, they would be singing in harmony. We are singing, the whole choir, under this moonlit sky. Music is shifting shape. Banksia man slowly turns his head and clears his pipes. Then a 1 and a 2 and a 3 shiver his languid limbs. Bark drifts softly, trying to syncopate, while the magpies carol out their version of mazurka. Eventually, even the planet deigns to join the choir, throwing back its head, letting the sound rip. We can't hear it, but still we know it, the music into which we were born, the universal key. This next one is also vaguely musical, and we were talking about during the break, because we're doing a book on taste, the 5 of us who keep doing these poetry books. I chose bitterness because I'm black and bitter. I've got so interested in in the relationship between tastes and sound and colour and all the sensations actually are built in together. And if you listen to bass music, bitter food tastes nice. I mean, there are bitter foods that do taste nice anyway, but bitter foods that don't normally taste nice actually taste good if you're listening to bass music. So I thought about some bass music I really like, and I wrote this poem. He brought me grapefruit on a Wedgwood plate, a serrated spoon set at an angle on its right. Eat, he said, bitter food is good for you. And when my tongue shrank back from the taste, He sprinkled salt across the cut face of the fruit, and he fed me a segment, and I did eat it, listening to Sariaho's Folia, finding at last a taste for the texture of bass. The Folia is a piece written for 2 double bass instruments. And I will finish with a poem that's set at Stradbroke Island, which is, its own name is Minjeri Bar. And I really like it there, and I really like its strangeness and its beauty. It's for those of you who aren't in Australia, it's an island off Brisbane, so off the Queensland coast, and it's basically a sand island, and it's a very ancient traditional home, and it's got a lot of ancient traditional stuff going on there. It takes an hour through fluky water, now ankle high, now grabbing at my waist, before I reach the sandbar, where waves are spuming, their hands full of sand, and the gulls are reaping the embittered fish. Your child is on the beach, digging a redoubt. My child rests on his elbow, staring at the sun. I starfish in the water face down, till the sea rolls me to and fro like a whale, logging. This is where we came in, blown on the tide, committing to a future that starts with cautious flipper on sand, imagining what it'll be like to live on land. Thank you.
So we are going to take a break. 10 minutes, and I'm setting the timer. And yeah, so please frequent the Smiths, and let's help support them and thanks for supporting us. And thank you, Jen.
Okay. Fantastic time. We'll say hello to...
What you got there? One dead body in a bag full of ears. I did Latin at school. We listened to those sorts of things. I can't have overwrought. I shall. I always do what I'm told. So we're coming to the last tranche now of poetry. And I know how much poetry we've all listened to over the last week, but I always think of Roy H.G. and think, this is a week when too much poetry is barely enough. So we have another 3 readers, and then we'll have to be enough, because then we're all going to go home. So we're getting the directors of the festival to read in order of their directorial debuts. And the first up is Paul Munden. And I'm doing what Kimberly did and say a personal bio. I met him a zillion years ago because he used to come regularly. He came up to Australia for our writing conference, paid his own way, turned up, served on the board of management, did everything really quietly and very efficiently. And then when we set up the research centre, and the dean, in a fit of enthusiasm, which we grabbed with both hands, said, yeah, you can have a research fellow. And poetry? Yeah, okay, and poetry. And so we advertised, and Paul Munden threw his hat in the ring. So Hetherington and I were going to Canada anyway to meet him because he was in residence there at UBC. And we met him not as the Paul who comes across to the AAWP and does management things, but as a poet. And he read incredibly brilliantly at that Canada conference. And he knocked our socks off, and he turned up and utterly transformed everything that happened in the faculty. And everything was happening, an awful lot of things were happening in Canberra. Went to every poetry event, came up with initiative after initiative, wrote extraordinary poetry, and was just generally fabulous and wonderful, and we all fell madly in love with him. And it hasn't been the same since he left. I think it's synergamous. I think it's called synergamous love.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, it is a thing.
I love you know that.
It's a weird
I love
thing.
that you know that.
I know all kinds of weird shit. And so we've watched Paul develop and drive and write and make and lose his lovely Claire and manage to keep going. And life wouldn't be the same without him. And so he's going to come up and read poetry actually for 10 minutes. And just remember, you're in the presence of a kind of a god.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm going to start with a poem about a poetry reading, and it's called The Empty Room, and it's obviously a very short poem. I'm just glad this room is not empty. After the reading, we fell into the lobby bar, demob happy, but when someone asked me the time, I was already in the elevator, stomach plummeting, back to the 27th floor of the snowbound Baltimore hotel, heading for the room where I had placed my father's gold watch on the lectern to keep me from losing track. Is there anyone here called Nigel?
Yes, me. The owner of the establishment.
Well,
There you are.
I'm very sorry about that. This is called Relocation Services. A 4-metre bull male saltwater crocodile named Nigel has been caught and electronically tagged. A tracking device embedded in his neck, kept in place with a wodge of putty. It's not just the kookaburras that are laughing, but Nigel is sufficiently thick-skinned to think it's not at him. For 12 months, he cruises the South Alligator River and beyond. The rangers map his movements, picking up a GPS signal that shows him as a green line snaking across a monitor screen. What they don't know, what nobody would have guessed, and what Nigel is totally oblivious to, is the river-level eyeballing that's rife, spreading rumour of his whereabouts. Except it's not rumour, it's gossip fuelled by a Facebook precision. That lump of putty will be Nigel's undoing. For all his roving, everyone suddenly has the measure of Nigel, has him pinned down. At the year's end, when Nigel, venturing back to his old haunts, is once more roped around the jaw, hauled onto shore and disconnected, the atmosphere on this stretch of water has changed. Younger males are truculent, females strangely aloof. It seems that Nigel has become both legend and outcast, achieved annus mirabilis and horribilis in one. The rangers, meanwhile, take stock of their copious data, making plans for Nigel that will keep him from the tourists, knowing what's best for him and them, but unaware that the data is out of date, that nothing here is as it was.
Wow.
Now I'd like to, I'm just going to change this. I'd like to read a few things from this new book, Amplitude, and thank you, Shane, so much for taking such great care of this book, which means a great deal to me. This poem is called Duet, and it's about the making of 2 violins by a luthier, violin maker called Steve Burnett, and they were made to commemorate 2 war poets, Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon. And the poem was read and the violin played at Wilfred Owen's grave in France on the centenary of his death, and it's being read here again at Smith's Alternative. Duet. A 2-man crosscut saw rips its brusque path through the sprawl of an ancient sycamore in the Craiglockhart garden where Owen and Sassoon spent shell-shocked leave. It's a standard operation midwinter before the sap starts to rise. A judicious sacrifice for the benefit of the tree, the heavy limb roped, then slowly cradled to the ground. Split, its dense pages fall open like a book. One for the younger man to be worked from supple greenwood in defiance of traditional technique. The other must wait until seasoned, fit to capture a darker tone, when the luthier's steel will once more nurse mute wood's recuperation into song. Now they form a new alliance as comrades in peace, two violins unburdening the tumultuous years within their shared and sculpted grain, even as the world tilts ever again towards the pitiful wrath of war, bleak underscore to the melodic weave of what is spared, incumbent but free. Now this next poem is called Relocation, and this is about arriving in Canberra and indeed leaving Canberra. And I would like to thank Jen and Paul from the bottom of my heart for bringing me here, and also to the whole Canberra poetry community that made me so welcome and have done again. It's been fantastic. Relocation. It comes with an allowance, and I'm daft enough to use it. I take the essentials: clothes, violin, some restraint, an old electric keyboard, not a piano, and familiar treasures to make myself at home. A few pictures, a room full of poetry, and as a whimsical experiment, my father's desk. I want to see what the past looks like once it's travelled across the world. But I get there ahead of it and spend the night in an empty apartment while customs rummage and repack so lazily that my mother's tea set quickly translates into dust. My life oscillates for 3 years between hemispheres, allegiance stretched to the limit and beyond, and still the end is nowhere in sight. I can't know the news that awaits, the utterly random shock. So, as some of you know, that shock was the sudden death of my wife Claire back in England, and this poem is dedicated to her. The evening we go out, it's called Film Night. The evening we go out to the cinema, the water cuts off. You were set to wash your hair over the bath, but are suddenly unsure as we leave which way to turn the tap. When we come back, the house is in darkness. There's a waterfall across the stairwell, the dog trembling behind it, with no idea anymore how to welcome us home. My violin case is soggy cardboard, the violin miraculously intact. Water has poured through the old analogue synth, and within a day my piano keys will warp to a mouldy waveform. It's years later, when I'm abroad, already with a sense of impending shock, that my daughter calls, telling me you've died, on that same bathroom floor where now, as I re-edit these scenes in my head, as it seems I must, I kneel and adjust the taps to mix warm water just right, then gently work the soft, rich lather through your hair and rinse it off for whatever further adventure we might enact. Okay, changing the mood for this final poem, which in an early draft was called Beethoven and the Penguins, and someone, I think it was Gail Pittaway, said that was just silly. So I changed the title to Ode to Joy, and it's a poem about penguins, and indeed Beethoven, because it riffs on that wonderful thing that Beethoven does so marvellously. He's so reluctant to bring things to an end, so it just goes on and on. And that made me think of Poetry on the Move. We don't want it to end, but you know, all good things come to a close. And it's written in a single sentence, so I have to take a very deep breath, but I may have to take one or two more. Ode to Joy. The staggering journey is almost done. The blood-orange sun sinking on cue into the southern ocean. the sense of closure so strong that some of the cliff-top audience are beginning to make tracks. One whole crowd of Japanese tourists already on the bus, when flying through the sea comes a burst of homing energy that self-prompts its own standing ovation too soon, with a plashing in the shallows. So much formal attire, all fittingly drenched in champagne, while up in the gods we gasp at the audacity. The crescendo, as each new jubilant wave of artists joins the prolonged hurrah of tingling feet, feet that make you think at first they're through, finished, but the tingling gets the better of them. And after each surge, each seemingly satisfying crash onto the sand, and another tempting sight of what must surely be the end, there's a pull, an irresistible drag once more into the orchestral surf, so that first one penguin and then another, with only enough strength to waddle up the beach, turns for a further rush into the sea, at which the whole brotherhood is drawn back into the triumphal fun, to more of this revelling in return, the not quite done-dom, where those furthest along have no choice but to halt, be patient, until they too can't resist one more frolic in the sublime before the so-called comfort of a burrow, where they'll be out of their element like music in silence. If silence is ever reached, it's becoming hard to believe as yet another mischievous bedtimer leads a rebellion into the watery fray before finally calling it a day, though day really is too small a word for what will quiver through their bodies as they dream a rapturous reprise. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we've got to get you back here. John actually has, my partner John has an idea of how to get Mandan back. And he said what he needs to do is take 2 yards of linen. And then you'll be sent back here permanently in disgrace. He said, don't take a sheep because then you'll end up at Tyburn hanging on a rope. So there you are. Our second director, who has done sterling work, is Shane Strange, who, as we all know, is also our amazing publisher. And I think we met Shane when he was not living here. He was in Melbourne, I think, and he was super cool. Well, I thought he was cool. I think all Melbourne people are cool. And he hung up with all the cool kids, and we were like, oh, you're all cool. You know. And so it was really quite impressive when he decided to move and come and live in Canberra and come and hang out with us. And Shane is one of the last of the true Marxists, one of the few who really understands Marxist writing and can deal with it. He's also funny, one of the funniest people I know, and able to insult people in ways that leave you feeling complimented in a strange sort of way. And he was none of these transformative people. Came into the faculty, came into the centre, and just did everything. And with him and some of the other PhD candidates, there was this whole morass of amazing, intelligent, bright, sharp people. And Shane said, poetry is nothing, I don't do poetry. And then he did. And then he did, and then he did. And he does all our poetry too. Yeah. And he ran the festival like a finely honed something ship. Violin, a finely crafted violin, where somebody asked to play the music, so he just had to pretend to touch the bow, and there it was, beautifully done. But Shane, he made it all happen. He got the right people together, really interesting people together, and he made these delightful, enjoyable, fantastic, and educative events of Poetry Alumni Festival. So now you've got your own poetry, so come and read for us.
Hooray!
You're still cool.
Thanks, Jen. None of that was true. Welcome to the low point of the evening.
Get over yourself.
So, in the spirit of the festival, I've been, and particularly the symposium. I haven't been writing a lot of new poetry, so I'm going to go diving through the archive to read a few things from back in the day. This little book that I made was inspired by a line from a novel in, a preface, a note to the reader in a Clarice Lispector novel, The Passion According to G.H. And it was the first thing. It said, "This book is like any other book, but I would be happy if it were read by people whose soul was already formed." Well, fuck you, Clarice. But it did inspire me to think about, other such notes to the readers for other such books that, might have such a note in the front. This book can only be comprehended by animals. Its meanings vary according to the level of domesticity. Cats, dogs, goldfish, budgerigars, guinea pigs, etc. are convinced the book is about suburban decay. Wilder animals, kangaroos, tigers, larger species of moth, monitor lizards, maintain it revolves around the protagonist's struggle to transform against overwhelming odds. Some smaller forms of bird life and most major reptile families ask that we look to the minor characters to understand the text, while more obscure arthropods suggest that we look to what the text does not say. Newer discoveries are being made daily by as yet unnamed sea creatures in the depths of the Indian Ocean, though their reading practices are thought to rely too heavily on the Russian formalist school. One line left. Animals bred to be eaten, cows, chickens, pigs, etc., are merely grateful for the distraction.
Yes.
This book is a list of instructions and exhortations. Become fitter, lead a more fulfilling life, earn more money, be loved, be more spiritual. To be more productive, you must set and achieve goals. To achieve dreams, you must accept defeat. To compromise, you must comply. To be happier, you must look at the longue durée. You must ameliorate promises, take the letter of the law, if not the spirit. Divide your time into smaller and smaller parts. Sell it off. See things in abstraction. Be a team player. Stay positive. It will end soon. It will all end soon. This book was written in the minutes after waking and before preparing breakfasts and school lunches for children. As such, any seemingly unfinished sentences, rushed passages, cliched characters, or fragmentary plot lines may be taken as evidence that the author exists outside the text. Stains from various foods may be found on some pages. This book will bring forth memories of childhood. The reader should be prepared, as these will neither be the saddest or happiest moments, but the most mundane. Waiting for dinner to be served, waiting for parents to return from work, waiting for the school day to end, waiting to leave the supermarket, waiting for the sun to come out, waiting to be grown. It will become clear that childhood was composed of interminable periods of boredom and frustration. This realization will force the reader to re-examine the person of the, This realization will force the reader to re-examine the purpose of their lives. Someone will call to say a relative has died. Was it funny? Okay, you've all heard a number of these ones, but they bear repeating. Sketches preparatory to an as yet unwritten children's book, 1 to 3. Young Duck is getting ready for his first day at school. Mother Duck is quiet. Why are you quiet, Mother Duck? Asks Young Duck. Because, says Mother Duck, I equate significant milestones in your life with the inevitable narrowing of opportunities in mine. It is unfair, I know, but I need a moment to retrieve myself from the existential angst that, if left festering, might consume me. Show illustration. Junior Bear is helping Papa Bear. Together they are building a letterbox. Look at the letterbox. It is a red letterbox. Junior Bear asks, Papa Bear, why is the letterbox red? Because, Junior Bear, begins Papa Bear, in a class society my labour is alienated to the point where I can only show my resistance through meaningless symbols of solidarity that mask my tacit complicity with the system. Show illustration. It is a lovely day in the park. Little iguana is flying a kite. Look at it soar. Baby turtle is getting older. Look at her mature. Little crocodile is playing with lipstick. Look at him experiment. Junior panda knows she really likes girls. Look at her hiding. Papa and Papa iguana are watching little iguana. Look at them overturn preconceptions. Little baby possum feels responsible for her parents' divorce. Look at her self-blaming. Daddy ocelot feels weighed down by the tropes of masculinity. Look at him conform. It is a lovely day in the park. Show illustration. Geez, you're laughing too much. I don't know what to do. Here we go. This is for my Queensland visitors. Beckons in. Portrait of the Queensland police officer as a young man, and a warning to our First Nations people. There's a derogatory term that isn't meant to offend. To staunch the flow of blood, he would have to reverse the punch and unhear the cunt addressed to him from the mouth of the man whose hands were cuffed behind his back, and through a series of recontortions, unhandle that man's body and release him into the back seat of the police car. And he would have to watch that car reverse up the street in front of the lockup and return to the conversation with his sergeant, who he would have to unhear saying, "No copper took shit from an abo." And returning home, he would have to de-dress and stand clean in his own skin, pushing water into the shower's nozzle, unthinking little affirmations, reapplying his stubble, walking backwards down the hill, walking backwards down the hall, decompressing muscle, unfucking his fiancée, and sliding into a coma from where he would never remember. How are we going for time? That's all right.
I'm sure you've got time for more. Do more. Yeah, definitely more.
No excuses. Okay, these are just some newer ones. I haven't been writing much, and I guess these are about intimacy, but not as you know it. At the line of motor inn, Unvarying they hold us, the silent lines of streets, cast stone onto stone. We have returned to find versions of ourselves, caught in light, understanding we are not what we were, but so close we can touch, our skin made of spirals, combining and recombining like bugs caught in sunlight on a field, or plankton caught in the eddy of a moor, waiting like sunset to close everything in the absence of light. No laughing now. Conscious uncoupling. We have a new apartment, tiny old ruin, the sound of water, an intricate medallion. I adored the elevator, startled myself, removed a scarf from the drawer. Joseph was still at the table, slapped like an academic. His son at the doorway kissed me, but it was a rule of the theatre. I would sleep, still sleep at night, to the sound of the river, and vehemently denied actions. One more?
Yeah.
This is called intimacy. They had misplaced conversations. Like holes in a woolen scarf, they found a pattern disturbed, a structure given way, edges to rub against a finger. If asked, they'd say, the leavings of memory are insincere, but tantalise nevertheless. Insect bodies appeared in cupboards as material stored for further examination. The peel of lemons hardened on unwashed plates. There was rat poison in the crockery, and in each drawer an unpaid bill, a clump of needles, a photograph, pages torn from magazines. But in the piss-stained rugs they found, in the unpicking of fibres, their own version of wonder. Thank you.
Told you he was funny. I didn't tell you he was tender too. Kimberly's our last reader, and then Sarah St. Vincent Welsh just want to say a few words, a couple of announcements, and then we will all go home. So I introduced Kimberly, who I did not meet at the AWP conference because I was out getting wine or coffee or talking to someone more interesting than my friend PH, presumably. And when I came back, he mentioned that this nice American woman would come by and interested about things that we were doing, and then next thing I knew, she was putting an application into a doctorate, and the next thing I knew, she was here, and I was her secondary supervisor. And coming to do a doctorate on a topic that I thought, don't we know enough about the invasion of America by white people? But she's utterly transformed my very arrogant and rude attitude to America and to American settlement by showing the underside of that. Not the underbelly, but the underside, the other people, the women who were not attended to, who did not make it into history. And anyone who's heard Kimberly read from her book, her collection of poems about the pioneer women who were hookers, brothel owners, and so on, she entirely embodies and performs and presents these women, and their lives are so rich and tender and sad, and a certain richness in them, a willingness to keep going. I can't go on, I'll go on, Samuel Beckett thing. And this is absolutely exquisite work, and I haven't come across anything like it. And in the short time I've known her, 3-4 years, I've also been getting glimpses of her life. And her life is really weird, it's really rich and strange. She knows everybody who's important. She's lived in really, I think, quite impoverished areas and art and beautiful country areas, and she's gone to school and she's done amazing, extraordinary work. And then she's come and lives in Lawson, of all places, and is making it a place of magic. So Kimberly, thank you for all your directorial work. You've taken up the tiller, and I'm trying to keep up this stupid metaphor that I've lost a long time ago. Let me go up now before I run aground.
Thank you so much, Jen. Let me just adjust the mic. At this point, I know we're over time, and so what I'd like to do very quickly is just remind you all that this is not the last event, because I'd like to end with a poem, right? There's Thursday night, Manning Clark House, Adrian Caesar, and Simea Gaudi, and Merlinda Bobbis. And then we have all kinds of workshops still online, and visit the webpage and you'll see. So, having said that, I'm going to read, and that's just a lovely introduction, and I'm not reading any of those poems tonight. Okay, so I'm reading from, I've got this book, and launched it with Steffi 2 weeks ago. But, and it's going to be in the bookstores next week, like in about 4 days, starting October. And so I thought, I've read from them, from this book, and I thought to really challenge myself tonight, especially because of the way I've come out of this this festival and this weekend feeling. I thought tonight to read love poems, which I really don't ever do. I write them, but I don't read them. And so if you hear one and you wonder, how is that a love poem, then I reckon that it's working. I'm going to start with The Swallows Are Chasing, and that's because Des is in the house. And this poem, besides being in this book, is also part of his Given Grace anthology that has won all kinds of awards, right? 2 in Singapore and internationally. Yeah, so this is for Des. The swallows are chasing. And the swallows are chasing God, skimming the green pools, edging the cliffs. The swallows are chasing God, building the nests in the O of his name. The swallows are chasing God, and we must chase the swallows as far as our flat feet and wingless backs allow. Around the fat cottonwood, over the gravel, across the bridge that spans El Rito, past the bare spotted here sign, down to the tip of the massive ruby sky. This next one is Ode to the Stone Fruit. I love fruit. I have loved the stone fruit, juice and flesh grown around inedible hardness, summer bounty, skin that berries, fuzzy or taut and smooth as a chubby cheek. Oh, baby, the tender between the pit and the peel, offerings in yellow, corals, purples and reds, an end of summer sunset. And the words, cherry, peach, plum, nectarine, with white flesh. Say them slowly, savor their ripeness on the lips. This is Morning Thoughts. It is the risk and failure and the possible. It is how will you touch me? How I will touch you. Who will your skin be beneath my hands? Will it come live, telling stories of wearing you for 50 years before me? How will it smell? Of every moment gone before you, or of nothing but the rain? What is the scent of the cantaloupe compared to the taste of its peachy flesh behind my lips. The jasmine stretching upward announces it's waiting before I see it. I stop like that. Its pulse finds mine, lifts it. Will it be like that? This is The Magpie Was All. We walked this way together one time, your hand in my back pocket, the jasmine brand new and round in the air, the light fingering brown branches, the oaks raising their many hands to form a bridge, the wind stirring them into waves, arms burdened by green, and the chattering trees silencing the magpie was all we needed to say. This is At the Rise. Alongside Boulder Creek, where it nuzzles through the canyon, each flower bobbing in the breeze paints her own miniature version of the scene. Hollyhock brushes fuchsia in broad strokes, and Queen Anne's lace dabs ivory, and beard tongue coats lavender in white with little sweeps of black. Each painter doing her part to depict the river leaping through the color-laden air. This was a poem. This is an interesting book of poems for me because some of the poems come from probably about the last year before moving here, and then arrival, and then probably the first 2 years here. So this is called Arrival. Beside the silent water, the question arrives with the cotton tufts spinning in the wind. What if the cottonwoods, the birds of paradise, the bougainvillea, the wet, wide blades steaming in the upper hemisphere were pointing down under, here, where I might settle through you like a breeze bends between leaves, if you'll have me. Okay, so this was my attempt, I'd never done one before, at a haibun, which is a prose poem followed by a haiku. This is at the National Library, Canberra. I've put in countless hours at the library doing research. I love this library. And outside this library, much to my astonishment, is this gorgeous Henry Moore sculpture. I'm from Detroit originally, which has just this incredibly fabulous art museum. And I fell in love with Henry Moore's work as a child, having absolutely no idea, just could read the name. So anyway, this is at the National Library, Canberra. Once you see your first lightning bird, you notice them everywhere, hanging out with the magpies on the lawn, outside where the grass has recently been mowed. They drop like mini bombs off the side of the building while chasing the yellow-legged mynah birds, creating disconcerted angels among the far branches of magpies alongside the lake, daring their winged brethren to dangerous flying games. They are stealthy. They borrow old feathers when other birds aren't looking, and outright rob the peacock, who cannot see beyond himself when chuffed in full splendor. When they strike, lightning birds zap instead of cry, and shock instead of startle. They filch chicken eggs from under their roost. You must envy the lightning bird, who is never afraid to warble and is always willing to shine. But do not leave your keys or coins unattended in the sun. He guards against some sparkling else stealing his lightning. And then, under threat, he'll rumble towards the mountains and thrash about for some time. The Henry Moor rests on its side, curvy figure reposing in the freshly shorn grass. Okay, I think that's going to be it, because I just want to read, I don't want to go too much over time. So I'm going to read something new, brand new. Finished it today, though I started writing it a few months ago. And it's a prose poem, and I've been playing with doing different points of view, different takes. So what this is called The Unraveling, a Mayan myth. 2 versions set in San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas. Chiapas, probably outside of here, is my favorite place on earth. It's an incredible place, and when you think of Mexico, no one ever thinks of Chiapas, because it's the mountains, it's not the sea. And it kind of reminds me of here, right? These green, gentle mountains. So this is part 1. I spent the night once with a man in the courtyard of Casa Nabalam, where most of the anthropological research on the Laconden Maya has been done. He was as dark as a cacao nib, and he sang and played the requinto in the trovador style. We tucked ourselves into a bench while the ceiba trees looked on. I loved him already, as if in meeting each other we had finally caught up to ourselves. I was trying to learn his languages, fumbling with the sounds of Tzotzil, flipping the R's of Spanish. I managed Balam, Tigre, Jaguar, with a silent J, and the rolled R ending. He guided my mouth. Every so many years, I open this memory like a gift, pulling edge of the bow, the knot giving way, pink satin slipping under itself. He told me I would miss him, and I do. Part 2. Where we sleep, there are no screens in front of the open windows, just the cotton curtains lifting and sighing. Night birds call through the darkness, and early in the day, emerald hummingbirds dip their beaks into the tilted bird of paradise cups, sipping orange splendor. Your mattress lies flat on the floor, and I stretch diagonally across it. You tell me about the place I will depart for in the afternoon, Tonina, where ivory butterflies spin geometrical patterns across the quilted green mountains. The Olmecs lived not too far north of here, before you, before this, when what sits under the ruins formed the top. I think of the carved head in Villa Hermosa, with the exquisite stone lips, and I turn to your own. You say I will miss you. I do.
Lovely, gentle, loving way to end the evening. Thank you, Ray. Can we applaud our directors again?